Hello, everyone, and welcome to this conversation presented by White House Custom Color.
Are you trying to mute me? No, it's just real loud, and I can't.
I sold Amazon when it was $25.
Listening to listen, not listening to respond.
Yes. Oh, thank you for that. Okay, Julia Woods. Here we go again.
Here we go, Jed.
I get a smile, and I get a smile on my face because you were the first person that I spoke to for this podcast about 34 years ago when we first started. It seems like it was a long time ago.
I was 2 years old, Jed.
You were
34 years ago.
Right. I was one because I know you're older than me.
It's just a little.
In any case, I get nervous when I talk to you a little bit. It's not a bad nervous. It's kind of like the butterflies you get before you go on stage, a little bit nervous because I don't know what you're going to say. And I can say that about everybody, but you typically say things that have more weight behind them. And I understand that's your job and I understand that's what you're supposed to do. But there's a little comfort in that for me, knowing that that's your job. So let's start there and talk about yourself a little bit. Who are you? Where are you? What do you do? Before we jump into what we're going to discuss.
Well, you're going to invite me to describe what I do in a way I never have. I invite people into the uncomfortable because diamonds are created in the uncomfortable.
There we go.
And that's what I do. So I am a transformational coach and I specialize in helping couples create the fight for the marriage they want. Like we all fight, but are you fighting for the marriage you want or are you fighting for yourself? If you're fighting for yourself, welcome to the island of loneliness. If you're fighting for your marriage, welcome to the island of beyond anything you ever thought was possible.
Okay. All right. Now tell the business and give the, where do people go and all that stuff so they can do that right away.
My company's name is Beautiful Outcome. And you can find me. The best place to reach me is on Instagram, which is at beautiful_outcome. And I love to interact directly with people. So direct messaging me is the best way to get a hold of me. And you can always email me at hello@beautifuloutcome if you're more comfortable with that.
Okay. So we talked about at the beginning, before we started recording, we talked about how this is going to apply to people that are in a relationship and have a partner that's beyond platonic. So you don't have to be married, right?
Correct.
You just have a significant other, whatever that looks like. And we are going to be discussing things, and I'm going to be, pulling it back to, of course, and maybe you will be too, photographers, creatives, entrepreneurs that both are in business together to some degree, whatever that looks like, but you don't have to be, right? It's not like, well, I'm not, my significant other isn't involved in my business with me, so this doesn't apply. No, if you have a significant other, this is going to apply. But you and I both know what it's like to be in a business with our spouses, our significant others. We understand those challenges because we've lived them. And so we have all kinds of anecdotes, that go along with that. But this is bigger and broader than that too. Right. And so the way I understand it is we're going to start by talking about this is broad to begin with, and then you're going to drill down. I know, and I'm holding on to my chair. But we're going to be talking about disconnection and connection first, right?
Yes.
Let's begin.
Okay. So one of the things I want to preface it with is this is human behavior. Mm-hmm. And I believe that marriage is the best arena on this earth to discover how we're behaving as a human. So these tools, what I'm going over with, this is in every relationship. I've had couples who learn this, transform their marriage, and then they transform their business partnership at work, that they're not even in their business with their spouse. They change their relationship with their kids because this is human behavior. But as humans, the deepest longing of every human heart is to know and be known, to connect, and to those moments where fireworks go off inside you because you're with this human and you feel so normalized. You feel human. You're like, oh my gosh, like we just connected on a level that I didn't know was possible. Well, our spouse is the one on this earth that we have the opportunity to do that the most often with and to the deepest levels.
Sure.
And so in each interaction, every conversation is both verbal and nonverbal. Jeff and I, my husband and I, could have an entire conversation without one verbal word being spoken. So,
Okay.
It could include a few hand gestures at times.
Oh, I bet.
So just recognize that communication, we're always communicating, and 90% of communication is nonverbal. So we're doing way more communicating without words than what we realize.
That's very true. Yes. Right.
Yeah. So at all times when we're communicating, our communication is either connecting me with my spouse, bringing me closer into a deeper level of connection with just one little caveat. My experience of marriage is one of the most beautiful things, to me, the most beautiful thing about marriage is it is the love between a husband and wife is a reservoir that has no bottom. It's a bottomless reservoir that we can go as deep into love as we want to go. And we have a lifetime to go as deep as we're willing to go. But the depth that we're at is completely up to us. It's 100% comes out of our willingness, because in order to go deeper, I got to trust more. I got to be willing to connect further. I got to be willing to know myself better so that I can allow you to know me more deeply.
But on the other side of that, the first thing that comes to my mind is that I have to risk more or be willing to risk more.
Exactly. All those things take risk.
I don't like that part.
Well, but you do love, I could guarantee you, because you're human, you love feeling more deeply connected.
Yeah, right. Okay. So this is the first thing that's coming to my mind, because you said it earlier. What did you say? Our deepest desire is to know and be known.
Yes. The deepest longing of every human heart is to know and be known.
Well, okay. So maybe that's true. Maybe it's not. I'm going to say maybe it's true. And I'm going to say, because it's a big claim, right? And so I want to dive into that a little bit.
Okay.
What if, because that sounds scary again to me, to know and be known. I like knowing. I'm a big fan of knowing stuff. But to be known, maybe I just want you to stay over there a little bit sometimes with certain things and in certain scenarios. And I don't mind knowing about you, but maybe I don't want you to know about me. Maybe that's my deepest desire.
This can be very true. And it is true. It is reality of what we choose as humans. Often we're not as aware as you are aware that we live in self-protection.
Yes.
Right?
I like to be protected.
We're either self-protecting or we're offering. But I want you to think about the moments in your life where you have felt most fully alive, the moments that it goes through every fiber of your being. And you're just like, I am so grateful I'm alive because I just got to experience that. How often is that out of a relationship with another human being?
Okay.
Where you went to depths of levels of knowing one another and being known, owning your humanness, that brought about the deepest meaningful moment you'd experienced?
I think I'll just make a comment here because it's striking me right now with you saying this. I think it has occurred. The times that it has occurred in my life have been when we have come out of a very difficult experience that we went through together and we made it, right? We survived it. We grew as a result of the struggle and the suffering. And it was like, there we were on the other side of it. And you're kind of looking at each other and you have that connection because you both know, right? And you can both really empathize with the other person because you both did it. Right.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
that time, I think, where I feel maybe the most alive. And there's you're awash in gratitude, right? Maybe. And thankful because you're like, whew, right. And you're taking that collective breath together.
Yes.
And that's
so think about that.
It's been in business and it's been in life, like
Yes.
we used to say that working together, the challenges are that much harder because you're working with your spouse, but the victories on the other side of those challenges in particular were that much sweeter. And I think that's what I'm talking about. I think maybe that's what you're saying too.
It is what I'm saying, because I want you to slow that down a minute. I want you to think about what's happening in those moments where you're overcoming a challenge together.
Yes.
Right? Because the powerful thing is, let's use a plant for an example. Okay. What causes a plant to grow? It blew me away.
Photosynthesis.
You'd think, right?
Oh,
but that photosynthesis is actually connected to what's happening underground, because what causes a plant to grow is when its root breaks through an obstacle under the soil. That's what causes growth. Okay. So when it breaks through a rock, when it breaks through a tough layer of clay, when it breaks through something that's blocking it, and you have watched trees will grow through a brick wall. They will grow through, if they have to, they'll go around a boulder, right?
They will.
But it's overcoming that obstacle that creates the growth in the plant. Now, as human beings, we're the same exact way.
Yep.
What creates growth, especially in a marriage, is overcoming obstacles together, growing through something. Because when I grow through something, in order to grow through it, I've got to get to know myself in order to do that. Right? I learned that I'm capable of things I didn't know I was capable of. I learned what's blocking me from getting the result I want to get. And I'm willing to get off of who I thought I needed to be in order to become who I need to be to break through the obstacle.
Is it the suffering leads to perseverance, builds character, and gives hope? Is it that? Is it kind of like that?
Kind of like that.
Perseverance, character, hope.
Yes. And when I'm doing that with my spouse, we're both doing the same thing. Right. Because often what happens in challenges is they divide a couple, because they don't do what you're discussing that you and Vicky did, where you joined together, and together you got to know yourself. And in knowing yourself, you allowed the other person to know more about you. Like, I'm visioning, maybe not what's there for you, but I'm visioning you guys, all that you went through with adopting Nima.
Yeah, well, that's the first thing that comes to my mind.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, what the two of you realized you were capable of and who you became in that. Like, I knew you leaving and post leaving. And I'm like, dang, those two have grown. Right?
Well, right.
You grew individually, you grew as a couple.
Yes.
And like, even just the way you looked at each other when you got back was different.
Yes. Right?
So you connected because you were willing to know yourself and be known, because you had an outcome the two of you were committed to accomplish together. And in that, you were willing to die to yourself and become more known to yourself and known to each other. And out of that, deeper connection grew.
That's true. Yeah, that's the first thing that comes. That event is the first thing that comes to my mind when we're talking about this, of course. And again, to go back to the business piece, because they're both important and they're both significant. They're both big pieces of our lives. Because that was a 6.5 month, really a 3.5 year process, but a 6.5 month deal that occurred. But there are microcosms of that occur sometimes on a daily basis.
Exactly.
Too, right? That happen all the time, whether you're working together or whether you have a spouse or a partner that's not in the business, but you have that connection. And there are times where you're faced with a challenge and you have that. There's okay, let me ask you this piece, because it's making me think about this. There seems to be a moment, or maybe a series of moments during times like that, where you both have choices to make, and you can go kind of one way or the other, or maybe there's 3 ways, who knows, but there's kind of like these paths that you can take, and they seem to tend to lead further apart or closer together. Is that fair to say?
Yes, because what I hear you describing is the connection triangle versus the disconnection triangle. In each moment,
Okay.
I'm either choosing connection or I'm choosing disconnection.
Yeah.
If I'm choosing connection, I'm moving towards knowing and being known. If I'm choosing disconnection, I'm pulling back and
It's like
I'm
an isolating.
self-protecting. Yes, I'm isolating myself, right?
Right.
And so whether it's how are we going to generate $5,000 today in our business,
right?
We can either connect in that obstacle that we're working to overcome, or we can disconnect in that obstacle. And Jeff and I, that can happen back and forth within one day.
Yeah, many times. And so when I think of those times, because, you know, it's also not like you go through a challenging time, especially if it's drawn out for weeks or months. And it's like, well, you know, what we did is we just came together that whole time. I can promise you that's not how it worked for us. It was like, there were times when you're like, well, I never want to see this person again.
Exactly.
But you stay in it, right?
Sure.
Like I understand that we could have chosen to separate or get divorced or never see each other again. And people make that choice, and I get that. But what happened is you have those feelings and you have that sense, but at the end of the day, you don't give up. You choose to stay in it. Now you said something earlier. Again, this might have been before we started talking about the connection triangles, but the connection triangle is when, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard you say the connection triangle, when you're choosing to stay in it and is based on, or has a foundation of responsibility. And
Yes.
The disconnection triangle, where you're making those choices, comes from a victimhood or a victim foundation.
Yes. So
now that resonates with me, but I'm not entirely sure why, because I got or maybe there's a lot of fear surrounding all of that. And
Okay.
Maybe it's conviction, Julia.
Could be. Imagine that.
So I don't want to imagine that, but you're making me face it right now, and I'm willing at this point. So talk about that a little bit, because I think that's a big piece.
Okay. So let me give you a bit of context before we dive into that.
Yes.
So one of the most common when people come in and start working with me in their marriage, one of the first things I ask them to describe is the current state of their marriage. And what I often hear is, well, we're like roommates. But in reality, I had a roommate in college, and I had a lot more fun with my roommate than I'm having with my spouse.
We're like roommates who are not having fun.
That's it.
It's kind of like, it's kind of like the ships passing in the night sort of feeling, right? Like,
exactly.
I know we're here, and every so often I see you, and there you are. And sometimes it's right across the table as we're having dinner, right?
Yes.
But there is a disconnect there. Exactly.
Right. And then there's other times where I'm like, oh my gosh, we're on the same page. I think we're thinking the same thoughts.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a really good example of connection versus disconnection.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't get to one of those realities by accident.
Ooh.
It is a bunch of small little choices, one moment at a time. Am I choosing connection or am I choosing disconnection?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the most maybe saddest news of all is by default, we choose disconnection.
Yeah.
By default, as human beings, we are wired for disconnection.
It's another big claim.
Because it is.
Okay.
And I can get you the scientific research behind it if you want. But it's the victim mindset.
We are wired to be victims or to play victims? Not to be victims, but to play victims.
We are wired to view life through a victim mindset. So think about it. The moment something doesn't go the way you want it to go,
right,
we look for someone or something to blame.
Always.
That's a victim mindset.
Generally not myself.
Exactly. Right. Where responsibility is when I say, this is no one's fault. I contributed to what happened. What is my contribution?
But aren't there times when we didn't contribute to what happened? aren't there times when it is somebody else's fault? Here's my issue, because I don't want to be a victim. I don't.
Sure.
And I don't want to play the victim.
Sure.
I do not.
Yep.
And yet, I don't even know how to word this. Aren't there times when I am, in fact, the victim?
There is a moment where you can be victimized. But once the moment is over, how you view it, you either view it through a victim mindset or a responsibility mindset.
Even if you were, in fact, a victim. Because
Yes.
there's no question that people are victims of various crimes and altercations and malfeasance, put upon them by others. And some of those are horrific. Okay, now I think I get what you're saying. You're actually validating what I'm saying, and you're teaching me that after that, because there is that moment, certainly. And sometimes that moment lasts a very long time, or there are many, many moments in that time period. But what I hear you saying, and correct me if this is kind of an epiphany maybe happening for me right now. What I hear you saying is that no matter what that is, maybe I'm taking a further leap. No matter what that is or what those moments are, what they look like, that we still have the choice on how we handle it or how we view it or how our life looks afterwards.
How we view it.
How we view it.
How we view it. So if you look at victim mindset versus responsibility mindset, they're like a pair of goggles that I look at the world through. And I can either look at the world through the goggles of the filters of victim, or I can look at the world or the event that happened through the filters of responsibility. And depending on which one I choose, now this is the caveat that makes the world of difference. So if I choose to look at an event through the victim filters, it will repeat itself. The pain will keep happening again.
Right. Of course.
Right. I will keep repeating it. I will keep attracting it back to myself.
Right.
If I choose to look at it through the responsibility filters, I open up a new future where I can see the choices I made that contributed to that and make new choices. And therefore, I won't repeat the same experience.
Okay. Yes. But now you're on some dicey ground here for me.
Okay.
And here's why. Now, and what I'm doing is I'm taking this to the extreme in my mind.
Sure.
Because that's what I do. Let's say someone is assaulted.
Yep.
They weren't responsible at all for being assaulted. And maybe there are legitimately zero things they could change to have prevented that from happening. Like they didn't do anything to make that happen. It just happened for whatever reason. Now, what I'm trying to do is delineate what that responsibility piece means. I can understand the responsibility that I have from that moment on I get to choose who I am and how I live my life and the decisions that I make after that. Right? Like that's as opposed to, being stuck in the victim mindset, that really is just like a big negative cloud over your life and maybe forever, right? Because of the trauma piece. And I understand that. But I also think to myself on the flip side of that, I can choose the responsibility piece in that I'm responsible for who I am and how I act and the decisions that I make moving forward. And one of those decisions would be, I'm not going to let that stop me from living my best life. I'm not going to let that stop me from being the best person I can be moving forward. But that I don't like the piece that's saying in a general sense, painting with a broad brush, that I'm responsible for what happened to me, no matter what, in some way, shape, or form.
Now, look, that's a very important distinction. And it's very important that I invite you and the listeners into a very, very important distinction. It is not that you are responsible for what happened. Okay. It's that you're willing to take responsibility for your contribution, even if it's 5%, even if it's 1%, you will take full responsibility. Now, we are in like the deepest waters. Okay. Trust me, I have walked through horrific situations with people that were horrific. right? And so this is not an easy topic, right? The miracles that can happen when people are willing to open their heart up to this is huge, but to do it over a podcast, there's way too many pieces that would need to be individual conversations.
No, I understand.
But what I can do is I want to take you to my own experience. Okay. You know a little bit about how horrific my childhood was and the level of abuse that I saw and experienced firsthand.
Right.
So one of the things that was blocking me in my marriage was connected to how I saw my childhood. And I couldn't seem to understand how they were connected. But when I began to walk through healing for my childhood, my coach began to invite me into this very thing. I need you to take responsibility. I need you to stop looking at it from a victim mindset. And I said, I had no control in the situation. I had nothing to do with it. I couldn't control my father beating me. And he said, you had a choice. You could, what were some of your choices? And I began to say, well, I couldn't have left because he would have, this would have happened and this would have happened. He goes, you don't know that would have happened. That's what you decided would have happened. And I said, I couldn't have said anything to anybody because we knew we would get beat if we did anything that would, say anything out, expose the secrecy, basically. And so it was literally a war for my soul going on inside of me to hear the words he was saying and allow myself to remove the victim filters and choose to look at it through the responsibility filters. And there was a significant breaking moment for me when I realized that at 18 years old is when the abuse stopped, because I finally spoke up. I finally said something. So what I began to realize is all those years prior to that, I chose to not say anything. And while that was, a young person making a choice, it was a choice I made. And I have no idea what the outcome would have been if at 10 years old, I would have told a teacher. It took me till 18 to do that. But when I could accept that I chose to stay silent, that was a choice. And at 10 years old, I didn't know how I could provide for myself. I didn't know whatever. But because I was willing to acknowledge I chose to stay silent, it broke something significant in me that now I could stand in my life today and say, where am I seeing myself as a victim and telling myself I don't have a voice? I can't say anything.
Well, and so that gives me a better perspective, honestly, because here's what's hitting me now, though, because you brought up 10 years old. It could be 8, it could be 6, it could be 12. It doesn't matter on one hand, in that regardless, when you're those ages, sure, looking back, you could have made a different choice and you don't know what would have happened if you didn't. But this isn't about like condemning that 10-year-old or that 8-year-old or that 6-year-old for not making those choices. And because who knows what your capacity even is in that little brain and then that little heart, right? Like you could say, yeah, I could have made that choice. I didn't for whatever, I was terrified or whatever. And that all makes sense. But doesn't that also make what happens to those little babies that much worse? Like that is what lends to the horrificness of those experiences, because especially with an adult, someone that knows better, preying on those little kids. Right. But at the same time, it's not like they're at fault from a condemnation standpoint. And at the same time, you don't know what would have happened. And that's just like a fact. You don't know what would have happened had you gone to a teacher, had you gone to somebody and decided to divulge that.
So here's the thing. In a victim mindset, we look for someone to blame or someone's fault for it to be someone's fault. Okay. Yep. So that's part of the victim mindset. In a responsibility mindset, there is no one to blame. There is no one at fault. There is simply a willingness to look at contributions. What did I contribute to those results? Okay. So if I can think about, my dad made terrible choices. My dad transmitted his pain to his children. That's how it is, right? That's his choice. That's his choice.
That's what happened.
Right. So I just get to look at what happened and say, okay, what did I contribute? right? And you and I will never forget the conversation you and I had at Texas school, where I felt stuck in a situation in my marriage and in my business, right? And I was like, Jed, basically what was happening is Jeff was in a deep depression. And I knew that I was fully responsible for the business. I was taking care of everything, but I was too scared to speak out. I was too scared to start saying, wait a minute, this isn't working. Something is wrong, right? And you're like, you became the one in that moment that said, Julia, you have a choice. And because I was still viewing my childhood experience through the victim mindset of how I didn't have a choice to say anything, it was showing up again later in my life, in my marriage with my husband, where again, I was telling myself I couldn't say anything.
Right.
And because you invited me into the power of responsibility to say, you have a choice, you can speak up, that saved Jeff and I's marriage, and it saved our business because I chose to start speaking truth.
And so the link or the shift between disconnection and connection is truth.
Honesty.
How do you get there?
Because I got to take responsibility. I got to own what's really happening. So in the victim mindset, we blind ourselves. When I'm in disconnection, I'm blinded. I'm seeing that it's this person's fault. I'm seeing that I'm not capable. I'm seeing that, life just goes this way for me, that I'm just not smart enough. I'm not capable enough. And so I blind myself to the responsibility of my responsibility for my choices.
Well, there on these, we keep referring to these disconnection and connection triangles. And I do, if you look over what it says, the triangles, there's 3 different pieces to each one. And with the disconnection triangle, you have victim, rescuer, and perpetrator. If I'm the victim, I am small, right? Is what it says. But, you have a victim mindset. You put yourself down.
Right. So, or one of the things in a marriage, it's very common is until my spouse changes, we're stuck here, right? My spouse is the problem. And until they change, nothing's going to change in our marriage. That's a victim mindset.
Well, is that the rescuer when you're pointing your finger at somebody else and saying you are small so I can?
Well, the victim says, until you change, I can't change, or until you change, this isn't going to change. I don't have any power. You've got all the power.
I don't have the ability to do anything because it's all on you.
Right.
Okay, now that might sound familiar a little bit to me. Okay, so there's that. Then what's the difference between victim and rescuer? The rescuer is saying that you are small.
Right.
That I'm good, but I'm stuck because of you.
Right. So the rescuer is, I'm going to try and fix you. Right.
Oh.
You're the problem. So let me just show you how you're the problem so that I can fix you and we can move forward.
The fixer. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I don't know anything about that. So we'll just let that one go.
Yeah.
But talk about the perpetrator, the last one, the third one, the perpetrator. I need to make you small so I feel big. Is that a conscious decision? Like you're telling that you're putting somebody else down to lift yourself up? Or
it's a subconscious. It's subconscious.
So you're not aware of it, but that's what you're doing.
Right. So if Jeff and I are in a room and we're talking and Jeff's just like, you're not listening, right? So he may be being very honest with me, functioning in a very healthy way, but you're not listening to me. If I turn around and storm out of the room, I'm functioning as a perpetrator.
I need to make you feel small so I feel big. Okay.
Right. If I can't handle the words he's saying, then I'm going to storm out of the room and take the power and say, well, have that.
Right.
I'm definitely not going to listen now. And so he's like, dang, all right, maybe I said the wrong thing. So all of a sudden he starts feeling small and I've got all the power. So now I'm big again.
I also feel as though that occurs, and I am unfortunately saying this through experience and maybe some conviction, by using intimidation, by not leaving the room, right?
Yes.
By actually staying in the room
Yes.
and puffing yourself up and pushing that other person down.
Exactly. A tone of voice, an attitude
Oh my gosh,
can be
tone.
perpetrator.
I hear about that sometimes, tone.
Yes. Yes. One of the biggest breakthroughs in Jeff and I's marriage was all I could see is how he was hurting me. Right. I kept seeing how he was hurting me. I couldn't see how I was hurting him. And when I began to take responsibility for the marriage I wanted and began to look at my choices, it opened up curiosity. And I started asking him, like with an open heart, without a jaded tone in my voice. I'd say, I really want to understand how I'm hurting you. And it blew my mind one day when he said, it's that face you make. I said, what are you talking about? He goes, that face, when you're really mad at me, that face you make, it makes me feel so small, like I'm the most awful person in the world. And I'm like, Jeff, I don't know what face you're talking about.
I have a beautiful face.
I'm like, will you please tell me, like the next time I make that face, like, I don't want to hurt you like that. Like, tell me what face you're talking about. So we were in an argument and boom, I flipped to perpetrator. Didn't realize that's what I was doing, but flipped to perpetrator. And he goes, freeze, go look in the mirror.
Did he really?
And I did. And I was horrified.
You're like,
ah! I'm like, holy crap. That is like, I could see the look of contempt was so,
oh my gosh.
It was pouring out of my eyeballs to him.
Yeah.
And when he helped me see it, I was like, oh my gosh, I understand. So when we started talking through it, I'm like, what's really going on inside? If I get responsible for what's really going on, I'm scared you don't like me. I'm scared you're going to leave me. So that's my self-protection, is to make that awful face because it helps me move out of feeling hopeless and helpless in the relationship.
Right. Like a defense mechanism almost.
Yes. So victim is where I go to my defenses. It's where I work to protect myself, but I cannot connect with my spouse until I take responsibility. So when Jeff was able to help me see how I was being perpetrator, all of a sudden I could take responsibility. I could get vulnerable. I could get honest, and I could say, let me tell you what is really going on for me. And that's when I flipped to the responsibility triangle and took ownership. And once I could take ownership and tell him what was really going on, I allowed myself to know myself and invited him into knowing something he didn't know about me. And all of a sudden we knew, like when a dog like lunges at you, okay, they're scared. Let me back off. Let me figure out how to be with them differently, right? But we do this to our spouses all the time without realizing, they're trying to protect themselves from me because of the stories they're telling themselves, about me, about the marriage. And if we can get into those stories, take responsibility for them, ownership, all of a sudden we can go deeper.
So it seems to me that one of the challenges, because there are a lot of them that are coming up for me, just personally, but it seems to me that one of the big challenges is because let's move forward based on your premises, which is that our default is the victim mindset, right? So we're going to default to playing the victim or being the fixer or being the perpetrator, and subconsciously.
Yes.
Right. It's not like you're aware of, I need you to be small, so I have to be. You're not thinking that. Like, you weren't thinking that when you were making that face. You weren't thinking to yourself, I'm going to scare the crap out of him, or I'm going to try to intimidate him. You weren't. Right. That wasn't what was going through your mind, but it is what you were doing.
Exactly.
And that's your default position.
Yes. It's another name for it is Adam's song.
Adam's song.
This goes all the way back to the garden.
Oh, the first people.
Right. It's like the moment something didn't go the way they wanted it to go, they looked for someone or something to blame. That's what we're born into.
He blamed the woman, didn't he?
Right.
It was her fault.
That's what we're born into. Wow. That's why it's default.
Boy, okay. There's some, all right, crazy connections. Okay, but here's so if that's the default, the main challenge to me, or one of the main challenges to me, seems to be like, in order to go from the default to this other position, disconnection and connection, there requires some intentionality. Like you have to make it happen. You have to choose it. And that's got to be freaking hard.
Well,
it's not easy.
It's not easy. It's called where character development happens. It's called how I grow my character through my lifetime and how I allow my marriage to be the most amazing arena where I allow myself to grow and be developed.
Is it safe to say, I cut you off?
No, you're good. It's just every day is a day that I get to choose if I'm going to live in intention or not.
Perfect. And that's where I was going, in that it seems to me that it would make sense to start with the little things, right?
Yes.
Walk before you crawl, before you walk before you run type of thing, in that, okay, you're in a business with your spouse, right? A good example for us is that Vicky was when we were really hardcore in our business together, she was the shooter. I was the guy in charge of, workflow systems and, Photoshop post-production type of stuff. And we had all kinds of tension there, right? Pointing fingers. You're screwing things up. Well, you're giving me bad files. Well, you don't know what you're doing. We don't know what you're doing. We're getting bad results because you suck, not me.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Seems to me that using that as an example, you can take a step back from the situation, and instead of playing that victim, choose to be responsible in that instance. Now, that doesn't mean that it was my fault or is my fault. And it doesn't mean that it was her fault or is her fault. There are issues there somewhere, but I feel like what I'm choosing to do at that point is stop focusing on pointing the finger and start focusing on, now, how can we solve this problem regardless of blame, regardless of who's at fault, right?
Yes.
And maybe it is me, or a portion of it is me, and maybe it is you and a portion is you. Most likely it goes two ways there at some point. But regardless of how heavy it's weighted one side or the other, you're not focused on that piece anymore as much as you're focused on solving the problem, getting on the other side of it together. Is that fair?
That is very fair.
And that's a small example. And that's something that could happen, a little piece of this, of what could be obviously at some point much, much bigger. But if you start working on those little pieces, right? Doesn't that then equip you to then start to face the bigger monsters and slay the bigger dragons?
Yes. So if you will, I'm going to go real deep and then come back up.
Okay. Just make sure you come back up, as I'll hold my breath for a little while.
All right. So every human being, what we believe to be true about ourselves, what we believe to be true about others, and what we believe to be true about life, we're working every single day to make ourselves right. Okay. When I live in autopilot, when I live in my normal default settings, I'm working to make myself right about whatever I've decided is true. Okay. So in a marriage, one of the reasons we're attracted to each other is because we can make ourselves right about our limiting beliefs we don't even know we have.
Oh my gosh.
Okay? So just look for Jeff and I's situation. So I believed men couldn't be trusted.
Oh,
that came out of my pain from childhood, right? Men can't be trusted and they're going to hurt me.
Yes.
All right. So I don't know I have this belief, but I go into marriage with my husband and I go into business with my husband.
Right.
Right. Well, I keep having this consistent conflict that he doesn't meet deadlines for me. Right. He needs to have a client order done by a certain date. Yeah. And I'm the night before, I'm like, I need that from you. He's like, I don't have it done. And we had a continual blow up over, here we go. Why can't I count on you? You don't do what you say you're going to do, blah, blah, blah. Right. So as I was taking responsibility for me, a friend of mine asked me, Julia, because I was complaining, complaints are very important. Okay. Complaints tell us so much about what's hidden under our surface than anything else.
Good point.
Right. So she just invited me to look at my complaint. And I said, I just wish he'd show up like other people do in my life. Right.
So good.
So she's like, well, how are other people showing up? I'm like, they do what they say they're going to do. Right. And she goes, but how are you showing up different with them than you're showing up with Jeff? And I was, first of all, I was mad, because the victim comes up and it's like, what?
What are
I
you
have
talking
no
about?
responsibility. This is all him, right? So finally, I'm like, okay, let me think about the people in my life who I'd love to have as my business partner.
Right. You think, right. You
Right?
do, because that's what you do as a husband and wife in particular, especially you go to these freaking conferences and you look around and you're like, well, they got it together. Why can't she be more like them?
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. So I'm like, okay, so these people who I would love to be my business partners, how do I talk to them different than I talk to Jeff?
Mm.
So I started realizing that with these people who followed through, did exactly what they said they were going to do, ask questions if they needed, renegotiated if they realized they couldn't meet the date they said. Oh my goodness. When I turned the light on me, I realized that I showed up to those conversations totally different. I showed up prepared. I showed up with clear deadlines of when I wanted stuff done.
Yeah.
I looked them in the eyes. I asked them if this was something they could accomplish, right? So we entered into a responsible relationship with one another in each interaction. What that brought me to realize is with Jeff, I kept setting up a victim interaction because I would be very vague. Hey, I need this next week for this client. Right. And it was just an assumption like, hey, can you get that done? I didn't even really ask
Well,
that
then it
question.
turns out that you needed it Monday and he finds that out Sunday night.
Exactly.
Something like, I'm using an example, right? Like
Exactly.
pushing it a little bit. Right.
So when I started realizing what I was contributing, it was in my communication, I started communicating with Jeff in the way I would communicate with someone who showed up for me. And guess what happened? Dang.
Everything was different.
He showed up.
Yeah. Right.
I'm like, what the frick? It was
So
me.
if you did say, to use this as an example, to keep going with this, if you were like, hey, I need this by next Wednesday morning, so it needs to be done Tuesday night.
Right.
You would discover then that it would get done. And okay, now I'm going to push it a little bit further because this is really resonating. In that situation, you're kind of the perpetrator, but you're also kind of the rescuer, right? Because you have this, and then it can lead to the victim, like, but I see perpetrator and rescuer because you're kind of putting yourself into a position where I can fix him. I can make him better. Right? But you're also the one that's perpetrating the situation, and that you're being vague to begin with.
Yes.
But if I flip that on him then too, because this is resonating, he's also allowing you to be vague because I am small, right?
Exactly.
He could have said, and what's crazy is I do believe this, and this is so nuts because I've seen it so many times in my own life. We got the same things going on. We have for 30,000 years since we got married, and who knows? I don't even remember when we got married, but it's been that way for so long, right? And you see it as you get older and you choose to work on it. But what I'm seeing also is that he could have chosen to say, hey, you're saying next week. Is next week Friday or Monday? Because that changes things dramatically for me. And he would have done that for somebody else. If someone would have come to him and said, hey, I need this, sometimes next week, he'd be like, well, when next week? And you would have done the same thing with somebody else. Hey, I really need this by Thursday rather than next week. Or if they would have said to you, like, when next week, you would have been, oh, Thursday's good. Right. But that you don't even get into that sort of dialogue when you're locked into this victimhood on both sides, because you're both playing those roles and you can get stuck there.
Yes.
And then wonder why everything's a mess and nothing's changes because you're stuck in that victimhood piece.
Yes. And why I keep feeling more and more disconnected from myself.
Right? Yeah. Yes. Okay.
Right? So let me give you a good example. One, I want to just make sure that everybody's understanding the triangles, and then I'll give you a real life example. Okay. So on the victim triangle, you have victim, rescuer, perpetrator. We've talked about those. On the responsibility triangle, we have ownership, request, and negotiation, right? Okay. So this is this would be a common thing for Jeff and I in our business, right? So my husband has this thing where when he gets into the creative process, whatever goes on for him inside, it can come out in frustration and anger, and he can be cussing at his computer while he's trying to figure out some new creative thing he's doing, right?
I have no idea what that's like either. So foreign to me.
Growing up in a violent home, anger freaks me out, right? Right. So here he's getting angry, right? So I immediately, my natural reaction is to turn into rescuer. You're gonna fix upset. I'm gonna save the day, right?
Yeah, right.
So I start reading
and
his
he
mind.
needs you to. And in your mind, he needs you to. This is what he needs.
I am the best wife in the world because I'm going to save him from himself. Right.
And you see it clearly. And he doesn't.
I see it clearly. Right. He just doesn't know.
Right.
So I put on my cape. Yeah. And I remember that with my marriage license came the mind reader ability, and I start deciding what he needs.
Yeah. Right.
So I decide, he needs a cup of tea. He needs, he just needs something, right? He needs a cup of tea. So I take him in a cup of tea, right? Well, he is like, I set the cup of tea down, and, of course, because I'm in the rescuer mindset, I need some sort of appreciation for what I've done. Right. Mm-hmm. I need to be seen as the valiant hero that I was, acknowledged. Right. So I set the cup of tea down, and he I don't want that. Why did you bring that to me? I'm like, well, why you gotta be so mean? Like, right. You're always so edgy. Why do you gotta be this way? Like, the kids are like right there listening. Right. So then we start bouncing back and forth you
stay in the triangle. You're playing all the different roles in the victim triangle.
Ping pong, like all the way around. I'm the rescuer, I'm the victim, I'm the perpetrator, and we're just going at it.
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
There's an example of what life looks like on the victim triangle, and it doesn't need to be that dramatic. I'm overplaying it, but some days not.
It's funny. You're overplaying it for maybe this example, but you're underplaying it from others, right? Like this.
Sure.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be that dramatic, and sometimes it's much worse than that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
Good.
We have literally had our hands around each other's necks, choking each other at one point.
Okay.
Okay, there's a full-on perpetrator.
That's an example of it being worse. That's an example of it being worse. Okay.
Okay. So now, if I am functioning on the connection triangle, okay, Jeff's getting upset at his computer. I recognize I'm living in ownership. I recognize what's happening inside of me.
Ownership. And ownership, it says, I am valuable and worthy.
I'm valuable and worthy. Like, I can own me first. Like, what's happening with me? I'm upset because he's upset. But do I need to be upset? What am I making up about his upset? What am I telling myself is true? What if his upset has nothing to do with me? What if it's exactly his process? And that's okay. Right? So I take ownership of me. And what I recognize is I'm uncomfortable with his upset. I don't know if he's uncomfortable. That's between him and his computer, right? But if I can take ownership for my uncomfortableness, then I can own what do I need, right? So if I recognize, well, hey, I love him, and I don't, maybe he needs something. I don't know. He knows. I don't know. Maybe he knows. So I'll go to him and I'll say, hey, hon, you okay? You seem a little upset. Is there anything you need? Right? So I'm making a request for him to check in and take ownership for himself. I'm not automatically assuming I know what he needs, trying to rescue him. I'm just being with what is.
Is it fair to say you're not coming in as the hero, but you're coming in as more of a servant, or with a servant's heart or mindset? Is there something I can do to help you? You're not even making the assumption that there is something you can do.
Right.
You're starting before that and saying, is there you're giving him that opportunity. You're actually, okay, in my mind, you're actually giving him the opportunity to transition from the disconnected triangle to the connected triangle, right? It's kind of like you're choosing that, and then you're giving him the invitation to go there.
It's an invitation, right? Okay. And I don't know. He may be completely on the connection triangle, right? I don't know that.
Because you also don't know that, right?
Right. So I'm just saying, hey, it seems like he's a little disconnected with himself. It seems like he's a little disconnected with whatever he's working on. But, let me just be a friend. Let me offer an invitation.
Right.
I can go in and I can say, hey, honey, are you okay? Like, is there anything you need? You seem a little upset. Honestly, he may decide to take ownership and recognize, okay, yes, this is what's going on. And he may decide to make a request. He may say, yeah, I'm working on this project. I'm really frustrated. I'm having a technical issue and I just need 30 minutes of quiet. Could you take the kids? They're making a lot of noise. It's adding to my stress. Could you take the kids and, go take them somewhere? Right. Well,
that sounds like a good negotiate piece. So maybe he's on the connected triangle there. Right. He's
owned what he needs.
Right.
And now he's made a request.
Right.
And now I get to decide if I want to, because I could go right back to victim right there. I could be like, well, don't you see how much work I have to do? Why do you get free of the kids? Right.
Well, that doesn't mean that you don't have lots of work to do either, though. Right. Because maybe you do.
Right. So this is where I get to take ownership for myself. He made a request. Can I honor the request? Right. Well,
I see request and boundaries. You are valuable and worthy. Okay. That's where we're at. Okay. He made the request.
He made a request. Right. So now I need to take ownership. Can I honor the request? I'm not a victim to the request. I don't have to do it. It's simply a request.
Right.
Right. So I can take ownership for me and say, wow, that doesn't really work for me. I do have more work to do. And so together we can negotiate a new plan.
Then you negotiate together. Hey, how can we make this work for both of us?
Right. You need 30 minutes. I need 30 minutes. The kids are, this isn't the best place for the kids as we each work
or
through
you could say, so you could decide that, yes, I can give you 30 minutes right now, but then I need an hour and a half.
Exactly.
I can do that right now and I can put that stuff to the side, but then I'm going to need more time later. And then he gets to decide, hey, you know what? That works for me.
Exactly.
I just need that right now. I'll get this taken care of. And then I have the rest of the day to do whatever.
Right. Or we could say, hey, why don't we call your mom? She said, whenever we need her, she'll stop in, whatever. Right. So we work through that. At the end of that period, there's no hurt feelings. There's no bitterness. There's no stories we're making up about each other. Right.
Right.
And we do this when we feel those moments as a spouse, husband and wife, especially in a partnership, when we feel on the same page, we do this automatically without thinking about it.
Right. Okay. So we gave the Leave It to Beaver scenario.
This is true.
And we did. And that's great. And I really believe, and we can make fun of Leave It to Beaver all we want, but the point is it can be that way. It can. Let's talk about for a second when it's not, or let's talk about for a second. Let's use that same scenario. You go in and you decide intentionally that you are going to take ownership, right? You're not going to play the victim. You're not going to be the rescuer that you feel compelled to be, or that you usually have taken that role as the rescuer. You're deciding with intentionality, I'm going to take ownership. I'm just going to go see if there's anything I can do. Right. And so you say, hey, is there something that I can do? Seems like you're upset. Is there anything I can do to help? And instead of coming back as, with a request, let's say he stays in that disconnected triangle.
Yep.
What is the healthy response, or what sort of recourse should you take at that point by staying in because the other piece of request is boundaries.
Yes. Okay, good. So this is where I can be like, okay, he's going to stay upset. He wants to be there. No bad. Right. That's a choice. Sometimes I just like being on the victim triangle too. Right. So then I can be like, okay, but his upset isn't working for me.
Right.
So how do I take responsibility for me?
Right.
And then I can say, hey, I'm going to let you work. What I know is I'm struggling to get my work done as I hear what's going on for you, but I'm going to give you the space to do what you need to do. Right. I'm going to take the kids and I'm going to go over here, or I'm going to leave the kids to watch a movie. Does it work for you if I leave the kids and I go to a coffee shop? Because what I'm doing, I really need to focus, and it's hard to do that with what's happening for you.
No, it doesn't work for me. I need you here to watch the kids. You can't leave. I got all this crap to do. You got to stay here.
Right.
This is role playing. Hey, I just slipped into role playing.
It's good. Okay. So again, I can turn into the victim if I want and be like, oh, he just doesn't care. He never, does whatever.
But
right?
you stay on the connected triangle. You're staying in ownership and you're valuable, right?
Yep. So I'm going to say,
I'm unwilling to negotiate.
Okay, good. You're unwilling to negotiate.
Right.
So I'm going to say, okay, so what is it that I need? I need to finish this project.
Right.
And he's not willing to watch the kids right now.
Right.
So what can I do? And then at that point, I take responsibility for what it is that I need. And
Yeah.
I can call his mom, or I can,
You
take
look
the
at
kids.
other options.
Right. I see other possibilities. And then
You
I can
look at what else might be true. You guys have said that before. And
Yes.
I think that's so powerful. What else might be true about any given
Right.
scenario? What else could be true? But because when you're playing the victim, you're like, I have no other options. I'm screwed. There's nothing I can do.
right.
But what else could be true? Oh, wait a second.
Yes.
We do have an option in that his mom has said she can come over and watch the kids. I'm going to call her. And maybe I take the kids to her and the coffee shop's right there, and I discover, well, there's this fantastic option. And maybe I should have chosen that to begin with because that's awesome.
Right.
And he can stay in his little victim triangle and be upset for the rest of the day. It's not going to affect the kids. They're with grandma. It's not going to affect with me. I'm going to be on my 4th latte, loving life. Right.
Right.
And because you stayed in that connection piece where it's kind of like rational and irrational. I think there are rational qualities that come, and we call it common sense, and in retrospect, sometimes you see it clearly. Why didn't I see that was an option? Right. Well, it was because you're in that victim state that prevents you from seeing things that are also true or that could be true instead. Right.
Absolutely. Yes.
Ooh.
And then later, as if I continue to want, because I'm going to need to work through it at some point.
You got to
Right?
face it. Still
Right.
there.
Right. So once everybody's, had their time, I've gotten my work done, all is good. He had his space.
Mhm.
It's not uncommon for him to come to me and say, hey, I can see how I responded to you today. You were offering me a helping hand. I didn't receive it. Will you forgive me? Yeah. Can you help me understand more about what was going on for you?
Right.
Right. And then he can go into, I recognize that, as I work on things, sometimes this anger comes up and I'm willing to discover what that anger is about. I don't have to become a victim to the anger. I own that I can begin to discover what's underneath that. Or I may go to him and say, hey, can you help me understand more about what was going on for you?
Right. And especially in those moments when the heat's not turned up so high.
Exactly. Because I stayed neutral.
Right. Well, and I think that's the big piece. Various parts in our relationship and our marriage, both with the business and even personally, we've discovered that, and now I'm going to frame it as in when we stayed in this victim triangle, in the disconnect triangle, there are so many times where things happen cyclically. Like you go through this process, and really I can see now it's you're transitioning from victim to rescuer to perpetrator, from victim to rescue to perpetrator. You're not getting out. You think you're trying different tactics, but they're all within the same victim framework. Right. And when we would have like little therapy sessions with our friends or even therapists, they would say, well, how did that work? I did this and I did this and I said this, and it was just like you told me to do. But, and what in reality, I was looking at her like I wanted her to be in a different state, like I wanted nothing to do with her. Well, that's the tone piece or the look piece or the condemnation piece that she's actually been complaining about this. Well, he does this and he does that. And I've always told him. And they always said, well, how did that work out for you? When you did it's the same thing. Well, it's because we were staying in that framework. We weren't asking ourselves what else could be true, for one thing. And I don't think we were realizing that there's this entirely different framework where you could approach it like this. Hey, how about doing this? Well, then he's going to do this. Okay. But don't slip back into that victim mindset. When he's going to respond to you in such a horrible way, that's when you can set a very healthy boundary and say, okay, you know what? I'm going to leave you with your junk. I'll use that word instead of another word that comes to mind. And I'm going to go away because I got stuff I need to get done. Right. And I'm going to take the kids here. I'm going to do this with the kids because I don't want them around you. Right. It's not good for them to be around this right now. You work your stuff out. We're going to do this, that, or the other thing. And then we'll come back. We can talk about this later.
Yes.
Is that?
Yes. I am fully responsible for my experience in my day. I'm the only one that can choose it. It doesn't matter what happens to me. I can choose to be responsible for myself and myself alone. I don't need to be a victim to what you're doing to me or what's happening. I can choose to take responsibility for me.
Okay.
And that's the same as a spouse, right? I am responsible for who's the spouse I'm being. If I want a certain marriage, who's the spouse I need to be to experience that marriage? If I am a business partner, what's the business partner relationship I want? Who do I need to be to experience that kind of relationship?
Right.
That's the only thing I can take responsibility for is me.
Right. Okay. Deep breath. That was really good. Let's wrap this segment up. Give your website again and
Yes.
ways that people can contact you.
Yes. At the moment, my website is in transition. So
That's
it's
fine.
going to be best to go to Instagram
Mhm.
at beautiful_outcome and connect with me there. You'll be able to get to my website from there. You'll be able to get to the different ways that you can connect with me and work with me if this is something that resonates for you and you want to take responsibility for you.
That was really good. Thank you for your time with that, Julia.
You're very welcome.
Hey guys, thanks for watching this conversation presented by White House Custom Color on YouTube. Be sure to check out our other content and click that subscribe button right there. Right. Right there. It's there somewhere.